Hi, welcome back to my channel. I have the mic today, which means I'm going to be talking quite a bit. So in today's video, I want to answer the age-old question, the question of technology, the question of apps. Is it Apple Music or is it Spotify? I have been using Spotify for the last couple of years and I've really enjoyed it, but some things have changed recently that made me not enjoy it as much. And years ago, I actually used to use Apple Music because I could transfer my iTunes library. So I have experience with both. I went ahead and re-downloaded Apple Music for the last couple weeks and I've been using it so that way I could see the differences because let me tell you, quite a lot has changed with both services. So I have a bunch of different categories that I want to walk you guys through and I'm going to give you a winner for each category and then I'm going to give you a winner for the video overall. So to start off, let's talk about design. On the Apple Music front, I would say that the design is actually really clean. It has changed a lot from when I used it years ago, and it's very intuitive, especially once you figure out the overall structure. Apple Music is very music forward. It's music agnostic. In the way that Spotify is a bit more cluttered because they have a bunch of different types of content now. In Apple Music, a great example is the now playing screen compared to Spotify. In Apple Music, you have a few buttons and one clear menu. In Spotify, it's a little bit more jumbled. Another great example is in Spotify, you have the Canvas feature, which is a little video that goes behind the now playing UI. And on Apple Music, you either have the album art or you have an animated version of the album art. This is one small example of how I see Apple Music and Spotify being different. In this case, Apple Music decides to uplift the album art, which is kind of the core of record or an album. And on the other side, you have Spotify, which is doing something new and lets the artist give a little bit more like visual flair, but it does take away a little bit from the album itself, simply because the album art is a huge piece of each individual record. Now, Spotify and Apple Music handle playlists very differently, and the playlist art. Apple Music has a very distinct style, so that way each individual genre and each individual playlist has a very unique point of view. Spotify does this, but it's definitely more standardized across the system, which on one way is great because it's really easy to navigate visually, but then on the flip side, everything kind of blends together. They've started to change just a little bit, but not nearly as much. Another example of how the design is different is the lyrics view. In Apple Music, you get this glass pane effect and the lyrics are floating and they really animate very beautifully. And on Spotify, you get the lyrics in a much more plain, simple, straightforward version. It really is a stylistic difference that you might prefer one over the other, but I would say that Apple Music feels a little bit more alive and Spotify feels a little bit more rigid and like everything stuck in a container. Also, the navigation in both apps is very different. Spotify mixes a lot of different things together, especially on the homepage, and Apple Music really just keeps things very clean. Usually things are organized in albums or playlists, which especially if you like albums from an artist, it is a much better experience of getting to navigate those as opposed to Spotify, which usually puts more of an emphasis on songs and audiobooks and playlists, and they're all jumbled together with video content. A while ago, Spotify updated their app to be more like a TikTok feed so you can discover more content. And I tried to get into it, and I'm not that big of a fan. I do not want to watch video previews of every single song and album and podcast. I wish that the content that I care about was easier to find more frequently. So when it comes to design, even though I use Spotify all the time, I would actually say I think Apple Music wins. It's a little bit more of an elegant and simple solution, and especially if you're using one of these for the first time, I think that you would probably have an easier time figuring out Apple Music over Spotify. So let's move on to music. It's the whole reason why you're gonna get one of these apps and pay for it in the first place. Okay, so the best way I can describe this is I have used Spotify for years and I've really enjoyed it, but when I started to use Apple Music, I noticed one key difference. The only way I can describe it is Apple Music is focused on music and the core and the essence of music, and Spotify is focused on the vibe that music provides. So what do I mean by that? A great example is the audio quality. Apple Music offers music at a much higher quality as standard than Spotify does. Apple Music has high res, which is default, and then they have lossless and high res lossless, which is the best audio quality you can get, especially out of a streaming service. On the other hand, Spotify offers a bunch of different tiers, but almost all of them are lower than Apple Music's default high res service. I went ahead and upgraded my entire music library to high quality, the highest quality on Spotify, and lossless on Apple Music. And let me just tell you, I really did not. I'm not like an audiophile. I am like a tech kind of nerd, but I really notice a difference between the audio quality in the two services. I've never thought that Spotify sounded bad, and then I started listening to Apple Music and tracks and albums that I like, and I've really noticed a difference. There is a warmth and a texture and like layering that is just different in Apple Music compared to Spotify. So now when I go back, a lot of the tracks that I love that I listen to in Spotify, there's just like a certain flatness or a lack of texture. I really don't know how to describe it. Obviously, there's a difference in the actual audio file, and Apple Music offers support for Dolby Atmos, which is like surround sound music. Dolby Atmos is really a hit or miss. I would not say it is a reason to get one service over the other. More recent mixes from really popular artists, I think, are way better in Dolby Atmos, but especially a lot of the ones from like the last couple of years or right at the start when Apple really started to push this audio format are not the best. I would definitely stick with like the high res or lossless stereo version of a song over prioritizing the Dolby Atmos mix, at least for today. But then on the flip side, Spotify doesn't even offer these options, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. So aside from sound quality, what do I mean by there's a big difference between Apple Music and Spotify? A great example is shuffle. It's a small one, but in Apple Music, when you shuffle a playlist, it just shuffles. It just, it's what you would expect. In Spotify, a lot of people have noticed this online. Spotify will not just completely shuffle a playlist. There is a little bit of an algorithm that's into it to either figure out songs that work better together or songs that you will like more, which in theory is great, but in practice, I end up hearing a lot of the same songs in the same order in a playlist that I've shuffled, which is not the reason why I'm shuffling the playlist. In the time that I've spent on Apple Music, even in the last couple of weeks, I would say that I've actually found more new artists than I have found much easier on Spotify. I was actually kind of shocked by this. I was listening to some of the curated playlists that Apple Music has created, and Spotify creates really great playlists. The difference between the playlists really is Spotify, like I mentioned before, is going for a vibe. It's like jazz in the background, dinner with friends. In Apple Music, they have playlists that are tailored to that, but their playlist and their content is really more centered around what the music actually is. It's kind of hard to describe. I'm like drawing a blank on this right now. I would say that Apple Music playlists usually focus more on the type of music, the content within the music, like the lyrics and the beat structure and the influences, as opposed to Spotify that really goes for like a homogenous sound in a playlist. Now, don't get me wrong, I like both. On the Apple Music front, I was finding a lot of different artists that I've never heard of. And on the Spotify front, I know I can always find a playlist that will like match my vibe, which is great in its own right. Because Spotify focuses a little bit more on the vibe and moments that music plays in your life and is in the background, because so many of these playlists are AI generated, on one hand, it's great because I can kind of look up anything like roller skating Wednesday night and they will make a playlist. On the flip side, they're AI generated. And so I hear a lot of the same songs or similar artists really often. And after a while, I get kind of fatigued because I feel like it's really hard to find something that's fresh. Both services let you upload your own tracks from your computer and then sync them across devices, which is great. Apple Music does have a slight advantage because they have the iTunes store. So if you've ever bought any songs in iTunes, which I used to do all the time as a kid, all of those tracks are available to me. And if I really want to go further and support an artist, I can just straight up buy an album and that artist can get the majority of the profit, as opposed to streaming, which pays very differently. Then on the flip side, Spotify, because they have so many AI driven features, you can organize all of your liked songs in your library by like a vibe, which is really nice because it's an easy way to navigate through your own library. And for context, my library is 6,000 songs that I've added over time. So there's quite a lot to go through. So in the music category, I would give it once again to Apple Music. I swear it's not all going to be in Apple Music's favor. The audio quality is just better. The playlists, I think, are richer, and I've just discovered a lot of new things that I don't think I would have on Spotify. Also, Spotify creates AI-generated songs now, which people are starting to realize. So especially in some of these vibe playlists, it'll be like AI-generated jazz music or lo-fi music, which is crazy. I get that it costs them less money, but I think that it just shows how they think about music. And since Apple is a multi-trillion-dollar company, they have the luxury of really focusing on music as opposed to just like filling sound in your home in the background. So let's move on to our third category, which is social features. And at first, I really didn't think that Apple Music had many social features. I've learned differently, but I still have quite a lot of feelings about this. Spotify, I'll put it simply, is the social king. They have so many features of sharing music with your friends, listening to music with your friends, listening to music with people across the country or at a party, and it's just really fantastic. It is the reason why I keep using Spotify, because all of my young friends use Spotify, so it makes my life easier, especially when I go over to a friend's house and I can just automatically join their queue and add my own songs to it. So we all know that Spotify at the end of the year does Spotify Wrapped. It's the really fun in review. This is what you've listened to the past year. It's always really well done. There's a lot of custom graphics and little bits of info and messages from artists. Apple Music has really been lacking in the social space compared to Spotify. Up until recently, they just started doing the year in review, and now they do the month in review, which is actually kind of interesting. So that way you can see where you've been trending much more recently. And you can play songs with friends. Apple Music has SharePlay and AirPlay. And Spotify has Spotify Connect, and both systems work very differently, which I'll kind of walk you guys through in just a little bit. Both services have a web player, so that way you can play music even if you don't have the app on a specific device or like on a work computer, for example. But the Spotify web player pretty much has all of the features baked in. The Apple Music player has most, but you still need the app to do some of the more advanced things. At some point, Spotify used to have the feed of what all of your friends were listening to on the right-hand side of the desktop app, and they've removed it, and I think it still exists, but you have to connect to Facebook. On the flip side, Apple doesn't do anything that's that public. They just add friends icons onto albums and playlists that they're listening to when you're browsing, which is a cute feature. I don't really use it very much, but it is kind of nice to know if you see a friend has listened to a specific artist, then you know, oh, maybe they'd want to go to this concert with me, which is not something that you can do as easily in Spotify. Spotify social features are blends. So those are mixed playlists of your taste and friends' taste that you add, which I love using those, and jams. So jams is a way that you can either listen to music with a friend that's not near you and it syncs up the audio for both of your devices, or you can join an in-person jam, which actually adds your device to that queue. So if your phone is playing music in your house and your friend comes over, they can join your jam and without doing anything, tell your phone what to play next, add things to the queue. You can add things to the queue. For parties and for hangouts, it's very fun. My friends and I use this feature all the time. Apple has a version of this. It's SharePlay. You both need an Apple Music subscription, just like Spotify, and you can do it in the car, you can do it at home, but it works a little differently and it's not nearly as seamless. Apparently, in iOS 18 that's coming out this fall, Apple actually won't require the other person to have Apple Music, which I think is a great idea. So that way, if your friend comes over and you guys have different services, you can still interact. So in the social sphere, I have to give it to Spotify. They've just been doing this longer, and I think the popularity of their service really was born out of how social the entire experience is. And it's something that I would love to see Apple Music compete a bit more with them on, because that would be, at least in my eyes, that would kind of be the death of why I use Spotify. Okay, our fourth category is third-party things, third-party connections, third-party products. Like basically how open is the ecosystem? And you might not be surprised by this because Apple's a bit of a walled garden. I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm giving this to Spotify, but not by as big of a lead as you would think. Spotify uses Spotify Connect, which is basically a free plugin that any device manufacturer or app manufacturer can plug into. So all you have to do is go to Spotify, connect to a speaker, and Spotify tells that speaker, hey, play this song, or here's the next 5 songs. The way that it works with Apple is a little bit closed off. They use AirPlay, which is their own streaming solution, and not every device supports this. So when I start a song on my phone and I send it to a speaker to play, instead of the Spotify route of the speaker playing it on its own, my phone is streaming the data to that speaker. And this is a very old school way of doing this. I hope that Apple updates this relatively soon, because there will be a delay, and if you group a bunch of speakers together, it's when things get a little crazy. I have a bunch of Sonos speakers, and AirPlaying to 5 Sonos speakers is a very different experience than just using Spotify Connect and connecting to the 5, and they handle it on their own. Also, because of Spotify Connect, you can control the music wherever it's playing from the website or from a bunch of different devices that have the Spotify app. And you cannot do that with Apple Music, because Apple Music sees it as a one-to-one connection of, it's my computer playing music to my speaker. My phone doesn't know anything about that. Both services use APIs that other apps can plug into. So like I have transferred my entire music library using an app called SongShift, and it was great because it did all the work for me. And Apple Music and Spotify have both given that developer access to their systems, so that way you can do other things outside of just the built-in apps, which is great. So because of mainly Spotify Connect, I would say that the third-party support and interplay is way on Spotify's side. It really just works very seamlessly, and it makes it very hard to leave the service, to be honest. The fifth category is exclusives, and I had not put much thought into this, and when I did my research, I really found out quite a lot. So if you need to know anything, like I said before, Apple is a multi-trillion-dollar company, and you know what they're doing? They're spending money. They are spending money. When I was poking around the Apple Music app, I was shocked by the amount of content that is provided basically for free, included in your subscription, that is just miles away from Spotify. We've got event playlists, we've got special DJ mixes, we have music videos that release early, we have recordings of concerts, we have private concert sessions, we have an entire radio station system of multiple radio stations that Apple provides on their own, produces on their own, where you have music that's played all the time. You also have guest interviews and celebrity content, even concert set lists. I just saw that Dua Lipa is going on tour, and I've never seen this on Spotify. Apple Music had a specific playlist that was approved by Dua and her team. That was her set list. On the flip side, Spotify has podcasts, so they have a bunch of exclusive podcast content. They also have audiobooks, which certain plans will include audiobooks for free or included for a certain amount of hours. And they have Spotify Sessions, which I love. It's where they invite artists to come to a recording studio and record either a cappella or special versions of their songs, which some of them I actually really love. And if I transfer over to Apple Music, I will just lose those songs. Spotify also does something really smart, and it kind of goes back to just how social the app is. They now have a baked in merch store for each individual artist and concert listings. And when you're a fan of somebody, all you want to know is where you can see them or where you can buy their stuff. And with Apple Music, I haven't seen anything offered in this realm. It really is, here's your music and here's our content. There's just nothing, there's no link to something outside of their ecosystem. While Spotify, I'm sure they take a commission, but I have found so many artist pre-sales through Spotify because Spotify will send me a code as a listener and I can get a ticket ahead of time, which is killer. I've used those codes so many times. I will say if you don't have Spotify, it's not particularly hard to find the pre-sale code on Reddit, but it is a nice exclusive that they offer. When I think about the apps specifically and the money that you're spending, I have to give the exclusive category to Apple Music simply because they just offer so much content included that costs them most likely a lot of money to produce or gather the rights to. This sixth category, and it's our final main category, is podcasts. And I just have to give it to Spotify. Spotify includes podcasts in their platform, which when they first made this move, I thought that it wasn't a great idea. But as far as a user goes, it's very convenient to have them all in one place. On the flip side, it makes the app a little bit cluttered because you have music and podcasts fighting for your attention, but it is nice to just be able to switch in between a playlist and a podcast that I love. Apple has podcasts, but it's in their standalone podcast app, which that has its benefits as well because the podcast app is designed for podcasts, which obviously is different than an album. So I think that that's a smart move, but it's just two different experiences, and you might be an all-in-one person or you might not mind the fact that it's two tailored apps. And Spotify for a while was paying for exclusive podcasts. Famously, they paid, I'm pretty sure Joe Rogan, $500 million, which makes, I just got to start a podcast because that's crazy to me. But they paid him $500 million to have an exclusive podcast with Spotify to gain viewership and subscriptions. And then recently, the podcast that they had locked into exclusivity deals, they've started to offer on other platforms, I think at a later date. So that way, if you want it most up to date, you have to go to Spotify to get it, which is just another marketing tactic, but it's not a particular differentiator anymore. So the final category is price. I've walked through all of my thoughts about these two apps. I hopefully have included a bunch of screenshots in my editing. Now it comes down to, okay, you're kind of torn. What is the price? Does it make a difference? And they are actually pretty different. Okay, so I'm just gonna run through the different types of plans and give you the side by side. For the individual, just one user plan, Apple Music is $11 and Spotify is $12. So in that sense, if you're just one person, you'd be saving $1. If you're a couple, Spotify only offers a duo plan for two people for $17. Apple Music doesn't offer anything for this. And for a family plan, Apple Music offers the family plan at $17. And Spotify offers the family plan at $20. Now, these prices on Spotify have gone up recently, and for students, both student plans are $6. And the other complication that especially leans on Spotify side is they don't offer high-res audio right now, so they offer high-quality audio, but Apple Music, Amazon, and Tidal offer much higher audio quality, on top of Apple Music offering all of these different exclusives. So what is Spotify going to do? They're going to offer a new add-on for current subscribers, which is very different than any other music service. All of the other music services that support lossless just include it in the subscription on top of everything else. Spotify is actually going to wrap up their lossless or high definition audio version into a potential $3 to $5 add-on for an account, and it'll include other features, allegedly like a DJ or AI generated playlists that are more specific. But it really starts to make the differences between the two services very apparent, because at that point, let's say this new subscription is $5 on top of it. All of a sudden, Spotify for one person is $17 and Apple Music is still $11. And I say all of this allegedly because Spotify was supposed to launch this years ago and they just keep delaying. But more recently, it's come out that this feature is supposed to launch soon, especially because it is a big detractor compared to other services. And one other thing with price. So streaming services, they don't make money, basically. Long story short, the business models don't really make a ton of sense. And the main way that you really should be supporting an artist is buying their merch, going to their shows, and buying their music. But obviously streaming is really, really convenient and I love using it and I'm not going to stop anytime soon. The major difference between Apple Music and Spotify is because Apple Music is supported by Apple being such a rich company, they pay on average for 1 million streams about twice the amount per stream that Spotify does. And there's a lot of different numbers out there, but this has been released by a couple of different people in the last year or two. And it's just clear that Tidal pays the most, Apple pays pretty close to the highest, Amazon pays pretty well, and like Pandora and Spotify pay almost the worst. This isn't like some moral argument of like, oh, choose Apple Music because they pay a tiny fraction of a cent more, per stream. It is just something to consider because I would say from the way that I've seen Apple Music treat artists and the things that they provide them, it seems to be a better deal for them compared to Spotify, especially because Spotify is just trying to get as big as possible. And they either have never made money or they've made a very little amount of money. And the Spotify CEO gets paid a ton and they've done layoffs and all of these things. Like there's a lot of drama with Spotify. So if you're trying to be a conscious consumer, buy your music. And if you want to stream, maybe Apple Music or maybe Tidal would be a little bit better of a decision. When I compare all of my categories together, on paper, Apple Music is the winner. It is just a higher quality, more comprehensive service. I say on paper because I've done this research and I've been using these apps for the last couple weeks. And right now I'm still using Spotify and I'm like this close to switching to Apple Music because I really like the audio quality and I'm kind of curious what a new service would provide and what features I would end up finding and loving. But then on the flip side, all of my friends use Spotify and I really like their social features and that makes their product really sticky and hard to pull away from. So if you have Spotify or Apple Music and you're interested in switching, I hope this video helped you. If you have never used either one, I hope that this helped you decide. Both services are available on the majority of devices. So even if you have an Android phone, you can use Apple Music and Spotify and everything else. So I hope this answered some of your questions. I hope anybody got to the end of this video. And if you did, just please leave a comment. I would love to hear from you guys. And with that, I will see you on my next video. Bye.